Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. I'm Rob, your host, and today's show is going to be interesting, fun, educational, I think very educational for a lot of us that are exploring Italian wines, wanting to get into Italian wines, and kind of not sure where to start or what it's all about and kind of where to start that journey of exploring that part of the wine world. And my guest today is a gentleman who is big into Tuscan wine, into wine in general, but I think Italy, he would say, is his passion, his love. And he was kind enough to come on, join us, and kind of share a little bit of his knowledge of the area, the wines, and kind of educate us a little bit on what we can discover when we travel to or just start exploring the world of wine from Italy. My guest today is John Fodera from Tuscan Vines. John, how are you doing today?
Good, Rob. Good morning. How are you?
Good. I didn't destroy your last name, right? Fodera.
No, not at all. That was
Okay.
that was very, very accurate.
So, John, I came in contact, I don't know if we say meet or contact or got to know you, followed you on Twitter. You do some really cool things, and as I was just kind of, in Twitterland, watching, seeing what you were posting, what you were doing, I started to realize, man, this guy is very knowledgeable into Tuscan wine, into Italian wines, but also that you're big into wine, you're big into food, you're big into a lot of the things that I like, and I thought it would be great for my listeners for you to come on and do a show and just kind of, it's an area of the world, it's an area of wine that I haven't dove into deep as far as really gaining some knowledge and understanding of the region, but I've been exploring it and I like it, and I thought you might be somebody to help not only myself but the listeners out as well that want to kind of jump into that part of the wine world. So appreciate you coming on.
Yep. No, it's great to be here. Absolutely. I'm curious when you mention that. I mean, I don't know what you say about meeting anymore in this day and age, but did you just happen to stumble across me on Twitter from searches for content that you may have been looking for, or did you get retweeted by somebody? I'm curious how you found me.
Through Russell family, through Eric Russell. So him and I found him first because I was searching wines in Paso Robles because I'd been doing some French things as well with the Rhone style wines, and I found out that Paso's doing some Rhone stuff, and his name came up. And then I saw him kind of retweet a couple things interaction between you and him, and I went, Tuscan Vines, who is this? And just that's kind of how it came to be, yeah. Just kind of started following you there and went, this guy does some good things.
Cool.
So I'll let you give people a little bit of a background. You've long history in wine. You've been into wine for a long time, and not just Italian wines. You like all wine. But kind of how did it come to be that your focus, is it fair to say, John, that your focus is on Italy? I mean, that's kind of your passion, your love. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I've decided to write about, to make my website, if you want to call it commercial. And it is kind of a misnomer that it's, Tuscan Vines. Clearly my wheelhouse is Tuscany. My experience and my relationships and my knowledge is a lot heightened there than it is in other parts of Italy. But if you do simple searching on my website, you'll find wines from all over the country, and not just a token article here and there. There's a lot of coverage on, especially Umbria, where I have some friends, and in Sicily, where I know a few people, but that's also part of my, ancestral heritage. So those wines have always been special to me. I think the reason I kind of named it Tuscan Vines to start was just because, Tuscany, it has that cachet, I mean, wherever you go into a deli and they have a Tuscan chicken sandwich. Everybody loves Tuscany.
Sure.
So I just figured that was a great way to kind of get a brand, use a very popular word to start building a brand.
So your history in wine, your background in wine, kind of give us that story. I mean, have you been in wine? Was it part of your family growing up that you were always exposed to, and it just kind of grew from there? Did you kind of find wine later on in life and went, hey, this is something I really enjoy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always remember, some early memories of my childhood, even though it was probably repulsive to me. There was always, some form of wine on the table. If not during the week, definitely on Saturdays and for big, Sunday family dinners. And it always just kind of was in the back of my mind. I don't really know why. And as I got older, I remember, I was always had an interest in Italy and wanted to travel there. And there was one time when I was browsing a store somewhere and I saw, believe it or not, there was an issue of Bon Appetit magazine. And the whole issue was devoted to Italy, where they were on a cruise basically, and they were hopping from town to town and province to province, and they were giving you local recipes of each province where they, quote, stopped. So I thought it was really cool. I picked up the issue, and then in there was an article by Anthony Diaz Blue that said, why build a wine cellar? And his whole thing was, the whole gist of the article was, don't just run to the store every time you need a bottle of wine. Go out with a plan and figure out how much wine you drink in a month and buy 3 times that much. And then every month, look at what you've drunk and then go out and replace and start building your cellar that way. And it was like someone flicked a light switch on. And so then I started buying wine, and even back then it was, and I'm talking, this is like, probably the very early 90s. I was buying, your Chardonnays and your White Zinfandels. And then I moved up into, California Cabernet and buying some better wines like that. And then I think I just realized that, everybody loves a great grilled steak and the Napa Cab is great with that. But I think I realized that, Napa Cabs don't really pair well with a lot of food. And being Italian, they didn't really pair well with a lot of the foods that we tended to make. So then I just started reading again, right? And I discovered, Chianti and Sangiovese and Brunello di Montalcino, and those wines really belong at the table. They have that natural acidity that balances with food, and it complements everything from, antipasto to pastas to meats, and it just made so much more sense for what, my family was always doing. And that's, for me, that was like a win-win, right? Because it was my Tuscan and Sicilian heritage, and it was great wines for the table. And I think that's where it just kind of blossomed from there. Little by little, you get deeper and deeper into it.
Yeah.
And anyone who's into wine, understands that passion.
Absolutely. Now, you brought up Chianti, and can you give the listeners who don't know just a quick kind of overview of that history? Because the way I understand it is Chianti was, kind of one of the higher end wines in Italy for a long while, but then kind of took a hit. And I think in the States, when I mention Chianti to friends, because I've gotten into it in the last, year and a half, 2 years, a lot of my friends are like, Chianti, you drank that? And it has this kind of negative connotation to it. And I'm not sure the history of that or why that came to be, but it seems to be there.
Yeah, I think it's really because of a lack of knowledge. If anybody takes anything away from this part of our discussion, I think what they should realize is that Chianti is not a grape. That's what I hear a lot of times. People think Chianti is a grape, and they completely disassociate it from everything else. So Chianti, in its most basic form, is produced from Sangiovese grape. It can be blended with probably up to a dozen other different grapes, but the core of the wine typically will be Sangiovese. So the problem with, the quality, which is what you're alluding to, is that there's several different layers of Chianti, right? And when I say Chianti, most of the time I'm referring to either Chianti Classico or Chianti Colisanese. There are 7 different geographic areas where Chianti can be produced. So if you imagine, I know Texas has way more than 7, but imagine Texas on a map as the entire state, right? That whole area in Italy would be called Chianti, let's just say. One word, Chianti. So if you produce wine from within that area, you can call it Chianti, as long as you're making it from the approved grapes. Now, your geographic area in that place, it could be garbage. You could be buying grapes. You could be blending it with white grapes. You could be making cheap wine just to sell and bring in the money. And that's where the problem comes in. So then now let's imagine within Texas, there's only 7 counties, right? All of those 7 counties represent an area: Chianti Classico, Chianti Colisanese, Chianti Montespotoli. So, and then what you have is those areas over the years have been identified as the best places to grow wine. So let's say within Harris County, right, is one of the regions, and then Houston boils down to the Chianti Classico area. You know, over 1,000 years, people have determined that that altitude, that soil, those producers there in Houston make the best Chianti. That's Chianti Classico. You know, so that is a very, very small area in Tuscany. And even though there's a lot of producers and a lot of wine, that's what you really want to look for on the label. And that will be Chianti Classico produced with Sangiovese almost, 80% or higher. It'll have only, premium grapes in the blend. These are producers that are serious about what they're doing. And then if you find, a quote Chianti, that's just a base Chianti, and it could be grown God knows where, it's going to be a night and day difference. So I think people have to realize that, just like anything, if you imagine even, whiskeys, right? I mean, you can get a 12-year Scotch from, or you can get a blended. There's a difference between Johnny Walker Blue and Johnny Walker Black, right? And
sure.
It's the same thing with Chianti.
That makes sense. So, is it fair to say that? When I think about wine in Italy or other places, Old World or where have you, in the States, did we get a lot of what would be considered, not the higher end wine? Have we always had, the good Chianti Classico available to us in the States? We just didn't know what we were kind of looking for to buy?
I think there's probably some truth to that. I mean, I think where you have larger, Italian populations, be it, here in New Jersey or New York or even in Dallas, Chicago, California, you would probably have seen Chianti Classico. But a lot of what people probably associate with it is that kind of pear-shaped kind of, fat bottle wrapped in the straw.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, it's called a fiasco. And that was probably, back in the day, you had farmers in Italy that were, growing these grapes and making wine, and they were packaging it like that, and they didn't package them in boxes, right? So the hay was a buffer to keep the bottles from crashing into each other and breaking. So they would take these bottles, on their horse or donkey drawn cart into the town and, sell it for, well, back then it was lira, but imagine, one or €2 at most, right? Because the Italians have wine with almost every meal, probably except breakfast. So, and they need a cheap wine that they can just, basically pour in a tumbler or a coffee cup and drink it down like water. And that's what Chianti, represented back then. They used to blend it with low grade white grapes to increase the volume of what they were producing. So, I don't even know who the original importer of that to the U.S. would have been, but that's where it started, and it just was a different culture here, right?
Sure.
And people didn't appreciate that fiasco like they have a need for it in Italy. Right. Now, ironically, some of the Chianti Classico producers and one of them is Monteraponi. He's in Rada. He actually decided, I'm going to try to boost the image of the Fiasco, and he actually started putting some of his wine, bottling it that way. I don't know if it comes here to the U.S., but you could definitely, just kind of Google it up and find it, and he's trying to do that.
So another wine that I see as I've explored Chianti here in the Houston area is the Chianti Classico Reserva.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. That's the next step up, or what's the difference between that and just a Classico?
Right, that's the next step up, if you will. Although, again, with the way things are done, the difference in that, or the meaning of that reserve, it could be very different from producer to producer. And this is where it helps to read someone, like my website, to get the information that you need, right? So when you say reserva, at the most basic definition, that wine has to be aged for, I believe it's a year longer than a Chianti Classico has to be aged for before it can be released on the market. So that may be all it is. When you see a wine that's labeled Reserva, you might just be getting a bottle, a wine that's a year older than the other wines on the shelf. Now, generally, if you've got a good producer, what the Reserva will mean is that, yes, the wine is a year older because it has to be by law, but he will also select what he feels are his premium grapes. They could be from a single vineyard. They could be from an area of a vineyard where the exposition is just better than the rest of the vineyard. Or he could even pull out, for whatever reason, this barrel is better than the other barrels. Maybe I've got 3 barrels that are really great. They're a little more complex. And he'll set those aside specifically for making the Reserva. So you could be getting a wine that's a little bit more complex, maybe a little more full-bodied, and has a little bit more potential to age. And it's already been aged either in wood or in a bottle for an extra year before it hits the market.
Okay.
So if you can find some wines, some producers that are bottling a single vineyard Chianti Classico Reserva, that can be a wine, equal to a Brunello that could age 20 to 30 years, if stored properly.
So the last question on the Chianti, the rooster, is this is something that people can, should they look for this? I mean, I'm starting to see it more, and I hear people tell me, look for the rooster on the bottle. If it's got the rooster, you've got a good bottle of Chianti. Is there some truth to that, or is that just kind of rumor?
Well, there's probably a little bit of truth to that, but I don't think there's too much. I mean, the rooster, the Gallonero, the black rooster, is just a mark of the Chianti Classico consortium. So that just means that the producer belongs to the consortium that regulates, alcohol levels, aging requirements, production levels. It's just a governmental, well, not a governmental stamp, but it's just a stamp of the consortium that says, yes, we've inspected this producer. He does things the right way. We're certifying that, the wine you're getting is the proper alcohol level, the proper aging, made from the proper grapes. But at the end of the day, if a producer isn't interested in producing quality wine, he can attain all of those things and still not have a great product in the bottle. So it probably gives you a little bit of insurance in that regard. But it's better just to, have a half a dozen producers that you trust or know about and to try to seek them out.
Okay, so it's not similar to, but I mean, I know it's different, but like I always know to look for DOC or DOCG, kind of gives me that confidence too that this was made the right way, following the rules that they have in Italy to meet the requirements for that particular wine.
That's right. I mean, that is the same thing, and then that's the governmental oversight, if you will,
right,
for the wine. And again, and that, a lot of people think, that's a great mark of quality, and it can be, but typically all that guarantees is that the grapes are from the origin on the bottle, right?
That's
so,
it. That's all it means. It doesn't.
Well, there are some other things too. I mean, so for example, for Brunello, if it says, DOCG, right, in order to label a wine Brunello and get the DOCG, it has to be made from Sangiovese. It has to meet alcohol and aging requirements. It has to be grown, produced, and bottled and cellared in Montalcino. But that's just certifying that, hey, this all happened where this producer is located, right? And that's true of anything, whether it's a Chianti Classico or a Barolo Barbaresco, any wine that's a DOC or a DOCG.
Okay. So you mentioned the next wine that I wanted to discuss with you, which is Brunello. And I love a Brunello. And I never say it right, but Brunello di Montalcino. I think I got close.
Yep, that's close.
So it's also Sangiovese. It's.
Hey, let's stop for a second.
Okay.
Are you hearing that?
What am I hearing?
You just hear me, and that's it?
I hear you.
Okay, because my neighbor, he must be like a street or two away, had mowed his lawn, and it was finished, and now it sounds like he's using a blower, and it's pretty loud, so I didn't want you to be picking that up. It would sound terrible.
Nope, you sound good, John. You sound good on this end.
Okay, I can hear you fine, so then we can keep going.
Okay. So Brunello is also Sangiovese.
Correct.
And, well, you know what? Let me backtrack. One more thing I wanted to touch on with you when we're talking about Tuscan wines and Chianti. There's something called a Super Tuscan, right?
Yeah.
Which is also Sangiovese, but kind of explain the rule of if it has what has to be in it to make it a Super Tuscan, to be classified that way.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
And, a lot of people, myself included, I mean, I understand that term and where it came from, and it makes sense where it came from, but now I absolutely hate it. And so to understand where it came from, we have to go back, and this is a good segue, we have to go back to the beginnings of Chianti, where I was mentioning that, the law at the time was, Chianti had to be, X percentage of Sangiovese. But it also, by law, had to have, I think, at least 5, it may have been as much as 10% white grapes blended in. And they typically use, other red grapes other than Sangiovese in there, but they were typically, obscure Italian red grapes, not like Cabernet or Merlot or things like that. So in meeting these laws, the Italians were producing Chianti and Chianti Classico. And, basically what happened is exactly what you said. People were having these wines and they're like, this isn't really very good. They're lean, they're really austere, there's not a lot of fruit. And then one of the major producers, Piero Antinori, and Antinori's wines are typically very excellent. He's very reliable, and he's a big company now, so his stuff is pretty easy to find. He came out with a wine, I believe, in 1978 was the first ever vintage. And he said, you know what? I'm tired of these rules because it's prohibiting me from making a great wine. It's tying my hands. So I'm going to make a wine. I'm going to make it out of 80% Sangiovese, and I'm going to blend in 20% Cabernet Sauvignon. And I know that I can't even label it DOC anymore because it's completely out of the bounds of the rules. So he had to label it at the time Vino da Tavola, table wine, the lowest of the lows. And he said, I'm just going to make this wine tremendous. I'm going to make a high quality wine. And he called it Tignanello, which is still available.
Yes.
And so everybody just said, it is none of these things. It's not a Chianti. It's not a Chianti Classico. It's not a Brunello or Carmignano. It's a Super Tuscan, right? It's a Tuscan wine that he has made a tremendous effort to make it at the highest quality. And that's where the term was born. So today, Tignanello is still produced. I mean, it's probably about $115 to $125 a bottle now, but it's of the utmost quality. So on the heels of Antinori doing that, came other wines. You know, down at the Bulgari coast in Tuscany, there's a wine called Sassicaia, which a lot of people know. That was actually produced before Tignanello, but never actually released as such until after Tignanello was created. So Sassicaia is actually Antinori's cousin. And that spawned things like Ornellaia. And then on the success of Tignanello, Antinori also created another wine called Solaia, which is the reverse blend of Tignanello. It's 80% Cabernet with 20% Sangiovese. So those kind of wines, there were a handful of super Tuscans. I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 or 10 of them back in the, through the 80s and the early 90s. And then as producers realized, hey, he's had a ton of success with this, they all copied the success. And people started making, super Tuscans. So when you ask,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the definition explained to me, and it shows you where you can get bad information, was that, a Chianti or a what it had to have the certain amount of Sangiovese, but then to your point, it had to have the blending grapes that were native to Italy blended in with it, whether it be a white grape or another red native to Italy. I was explained that if you blend it with a grape that's not native, like a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Merlot or something like that, well, it was more native to France, now it's a super Tuscan. And that was the definition explained to me, and obviously it was not the right definition.
No, that's not right at all. I mean, over the years, the laws of Chianti Classico have changed. They change so often. I've actually, off the top of my head, I'm not even certain what it is anymore. But I think Chianti Classico now, in order to be labeled Chianti Classico, it has to be at least, I think, 80% Sangiovese. Okay, but that other 20% can be almost anything now. First of all, it could be 100% Sangiovese. You can use Canaiolo, Colorino, Malvasia, Cabernet, Syrah, Merlot, Petit Verdot, Alicante. You can throw anything in there, just about anything you want, as long as it's less than 20% of the blend. And see, that's also part of the problem with Chianti's identity and the identity of their Gran Selezione. But see, this is where it gets kind of screwy, because what you were saying is kind of true. It would have been true years ago, right? So, excuse me, when Chianti had to be blended, and people were copying what Antinori did. When he made Tignanello, he made it, almost, it was 80% Sangiovese, 20% Cabernet. You had a bunch of producers that said, all right, well, that's a good idea, but I think I'm just going to use 100% Sangiovese, and I'm going to make my Super Tuscan that way. So that gives birth to the wines like Le Pergoletorte, Ceparello, Flaccianello, Fontaloro, Percarlo. All those wines are 100% Sangiovese. They all still exist today. Now, the funny thing is, after the Chianti Consorzio changed their laws, saying, okay, you guys are right, you've got a point. We want you to label your wine Chianti Classico. So now if you want to, go ahead and make Chianti Classico out of 100% Sangiovese. So overnight, all those wines I just mentioned that were 100% Sangiovese Super Tuscans could now theoretically have been labeled Chianti Classico. Well, none of the producers did that, because they had all, built a brand, based on the names of those wines, that people, including myself, seek out today. And those wines sell at a premium. They typically sell for way more than a Chianti Classico or a Chianti Classico Reserva even would sell for. And to my knowledge, not a single one of them has changed that. But they could all label it, Chianti Classico Reserva. They could even probably label it a Gran Selezione if they wanted to. Depending on if they, met the aging requirements and the other regulations, but none of them have done that. There's still so much value in their brand name. But a lot of people, I don't even know that I haven't even seen like retailers anymore. They don't usually blast the phrase Super Tuscan out anymore. I think it's kind of almost, been there, done that, kind of run its course.
And that's a great point. That's why I asked the question and thought I was getting educated on why some wines were called that, because it's never on the label. You never see anything on a label that says Super Tuscan. So I was how do you know? How do you know something's a Super Tuscan?
To me, it's a retailer's term, and like I said, it really doesn't mean anything. There's an article on my website I wrote years and years ago. I think I called it something like Super or just plain Tuscan. I think that might have been, because a term you also always hear is the term baby Super Tuscan, which I detest. And what retailers have created that term for are wines, like Pignanello, 80% Sangiovese, 20% Cabernet, but a wine that costs, $8.99 or $9.99. And I'm like, all you're getting is a table wine. It's just it isn't a Super Tuscan. When I hear Super Tuscan, it's got to be, a serious wine. And I say that with like some oomph behind it, right? It's got to be a full-bodied wine. It's got to be a great source of fruit. It's got to be aged before it's released. It's got to be capable of aging and improving. And unfortunately, it's got to be expensive. Because you don't get one without the other. If someone tells you, oh, here's a $10 bottle of wine just as good as such and such, no, it's probably not.
Yeah, it's the old rule: you get what you pay for, right?
That's exactly right, and that's one of my rules in wine is that you get what you pay for, almost.
I would agree with that, because I've had some air quotes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some what were supposed to be nicer wines and paid for them, and whether they probably were good wines, just didn't please my palate. I'll say it that way.
Right, because again, if you're a producer and you're making decent quality Chianti Classico, and you're looking at what's going on around you, you can say, okay, so all I have to do is take a couple barrels of Sangiovese, throw it in a bottle, give it a fancy name, and charge $75 for it. And hey, it's a Super Tuscan, because I don't put anything on the label other than that, and
right.
And a lot of people have done that. There are plenty of, like you said, air quotes, Super Tuscans that I won't go anywhere near because they don't have the pedigree.
That makes sense. And I kind of pivoted there and got us back into that region, but you had brought up Brunello and Brunello di Montalcino. And so that's a Sangiovese grape too. So how do you differentiate between that and a Chianti? Is it just region because it's not in Chianti, but it's still
Sangiovese? There's two main distinctions, or without getting too crazy, like I said, the area of Tuscany is fairly big, but so the Chianti Classico zone, or even the zone of Chianti, lies, I'll just say most of it lies between Florence and Siena, right? So it's basically in central Tuscany. And even though I would say Brunello was also in central Tuscany, it is to the south of Chianti Classico. So generally, as a general observation, Brunello will be a little bit warmer. Now, when you start factoring in all kinds of things like elevation, it can be, a myriad of possibilities. But generally, it's a little bit warmer in Brunello than it will be in Chianti Classico. So that would be the first thing. But the main difference is that Brunello is made, yes, it's from Sangiovese, but it's from a special clone of Sangiovese that has been identified called Sangiovese Grosso. And Grosso in Italy means, fat or big. So what that is alluding to is that the berries of Sangiovese Grosso, the individual berries of the grape, are bigger than the Sangiovese that they use in Chianti Classico. So the grape is bigger, the pulp and the juice is bigger, and the skin contact, surrounding that grape is a little bit thicker. The skin of the Sangiovese Grosso grape is a little bit thicker, and Brunello is in an allusion to like the color brown. I mean, the Sangiovese Grosso grape kind of has a brownish tint to the skin, if you will. I don't really know if I would agree to that with the ones that I've seen on the vines, but I guess I have seen it a little bit. So what that means then is, in order to be labeled Brunello, it must be 100% Sangiovese Grosso. There is no blending of any kind allowed in Brunello di Montalcino. And that's why you might have heard the term Brunello Gate, and, people can look that up. I think there's probably even a Wikipedia article on it now. What happened then was in the, I believe it was the 2000 and, I don't know if it was the 2003 or 1993. I guess it was the 2003 vintage. There was some scuttlebutt in Montalcino. I don't know how the rumor got started, where people were realizing that, hey, these wines that certain producers are producing, the color, it's like jet black. It doesn't look anything like what Sangiovese would look like. Most Sangiovese wines are, garnet, deep ruby. They have violet highlights to them. And people were saying, yeah, I wonder if these people are, screwing around with the blends to maybe, make it more, approachable to the American market. They want to get exported. I don't know what it was. So the Consorzio did some, raids and some random samples. And I think they realized that certain producers, and I think the settlement was kind of quiet, it wasn't ever made public, but supposedly they did find that a couple producers were throwing some Cabernet and Merlot into their Brunello. So, I mean, that supposedly is not, it's over and done with, but it was a pretty big scandal for Montalcino. But, and, now it's funny because I have seen Brunello from reputable producers that are very, very dark. And, that's a subject, well, it's not a subject, but a fact of the way that they're producing the wine. I mean, the quality and the know-how, even from the mid-'90s, is far superior than it was back then with the way that they're producing quality wine. And also, if you take the Sangiovese and you throw it into a barrique as opposed to a gigantic Grande Botte, huge barrel, the barrique will impart much more color than a wine that's in a bigger barrel. You'll get a Sangiovese that looks very, very dark. So it can be done without tinkering with the blend. But now when you see it, Brunello, it must be 100% Sangiovese Grosso.
I had never heard the term Grosso. I just heard Sangiovese, so I thought it was the same grape. So that's good for me to get educated on that as well.
So, I mean, it's the same grape, but it's a different clone.
It kind of reminds me of when I think of Petit Syrah and Syrah. Would that be fair? Or is those not? I
think those are two different grapes, Petit Syrah and Syrah. So I'm not. To me, It would be like it's almost like a yellow, orange, red, and green bell pepper.
Okay, that's.
I mean, that's kind of the way I would think about it, because even within Sangiovese Grosso, there are hundreds of clones of Sangiovese Grosso. And Castello Banfi did a huge study with the University of Siena, probably 10 years ago now. It was a huge, huge study. I have this, they gave me a copy of this textbook that they produced. It's like an encyclopedic volume of all the clonal research that they did. Which clones of Sangiovese Grosso do better in certain soil types? Which clones are most aromatic? Which clones produce the darkest color? And, Banfi did it to match the soil types on their estate, so they knew exactly what clones to plant where to get the best results. But then they shared it with the entire, Brunello community. But within that study, there had to have been a couple hundred clones, and I think Banfi highlighted maybe the best, 6 or 12 clones that are suited to their property, and that's what they use now. So it's interesting. It's something that you can ask. I have the general manager of Castello Bonfi, Enrico Vigliarchio, is going to be joining me on a Zoom July, whatever that Sunday is after July 4th, not the
12th.
5th. So
that'd be the 12th.
I think it's the 11th or the 12th. He will be on that Zoom call, and he can definitely speak to that. He is the highest person in the Castello Bonfi hierarchy, other than the American owner Christina Mariani. He runs every facet of the estate in Montalcino, so he's going to be on in a couple of weeks with me.
Now, touching on your Zoom calls, because you've done these, I mean, since kind of the COVID has started, and you started doing the Zoom calls with different producers from Italy that you have relationships with. And it's been fantastic. I've absolutely enjoyed it and have learned a lot more, my wife as well. Are these something that, I kind of see the same group every time we're on? Is this something that if people want to get on and start following you on your social media and get on your newsletter list and those things, can anybody join, or is this how does it work?
Oh, absolutely. Anybody can join. The only restriction, and it really isn't much of one, is that I don't share the Zoom link publicly because of all the Zoom bombing and things that have been happening with those calls.
Sure.
So anybody can reach out to me. I'm accessible through the email, through my website, or through I've had people approach me through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All they need to do is contact me and say, hey, I'd like to join, and I'll send them the link. So there's no limit to the number of people to be on the calls. Back in March, when the weather was kind of a little iffy still, we were getting more people on the calls. But now as the weather has gotten nicer, it's a little harder. But and see, the problem is looping in the Italians, they're 6 hours ahead. So
yeah,
I basically I've been doing them at 1:00 on Sunday afternoons.
And that's 1:00 Eastern time, so depending on where you
correct.
are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that, so a lot of people are out, enjoying the nice weather, and like we skipped for Mother's Day, we skipped for Father's Day tomorrow. We're not having one. We're skipping July 4th weekend because I don't want people to, give me a phone call and then they come on and there's, 5 people there.
Right.
Yeah. One of them is me. So. I mean, it's been a lot of fun, and, you've been attending regularly as a bunch of other people have. I think the feedback has been great.
Yeah, we appreciate you doing it because it's just something for us. And, I hear a lot of people say, John, and I know I'm kind of getting off track here a little bit, but I hear a lot of people say, well, once everything gets back to whatever normal is going to be, these things will go away. And I disagree with that. I think, we can't all just pick up and travel to Italy. And with I didn't really know about Zoom and get into Zoom until kind of all this happened. And now that it's here, I think it's a great tool for people like you to get us exposed to these actual winemakers in Italy or wherever else they might be and be able to have that time to sit down with them and maybe buy a bottle in advance and be able to drink through with them and them explaining to us what we have in the bottle, in the glass. And I think it's fantastic. I think it's going to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, my plan is definitely to have it stick around. I mean, as long as I can get, the winemakers willing to come on, and no one has said to me, no, I don't want to do it. It's just a matter of lining up their schedule. I mean, by and large, that's what attracts me to these people, and even, my wife who enjoys wine, but she's gotten more interested in it as well because she's an avid gardener. Right. And she sees these people as, gardeners on steroids. They're farmers,
Yeah.
And she can notice the peony that are planted on one side of the house where it gets more sun will completely be bloomed, where the peony on the other side of the house haven't even opened yet. And you're talking about, something that's 40 or 50 yards away from each other in the same soil.
Yeah.
So when she walks the vineyard, she's amazed at what these winemakers, tell her, well, this side of the vineyard got hit by, frost or hail, so we don't have any production from there, and that, there's some good videos on my Facebook page with winemaker Daniele Rossi from Campo Chiarenti. We were with him in 2017 also, and when they had some crazy frost on his vineyards. And you would go down a vine row with him, and you would look at two grapevines, not 2 feet apart. One would be absolutely healthy and growing. The other one would be completely dead because of the frost. That's how local it can be. And, on top of that, they have the wild boar, the cinghiale and the deer. And when it's kind of heartbreaking when the guy tells you, oh yeah, the deer came and they ate the shoots off of this, vine. So we're not going to get any production from this vine this year. But the problem is it takes 2 years to come back. So we're not going to get anything from it next year either. So, they're not allowed to kill the animals, so he can't hunt them away. And the only thing you can do is put up, incredibly expensive fencing, and not everybody can do that.
Which is crazy to me that you're not able to shoot the animals, because I would just think that the problem's just going to get worse. It's never going to get, somewhat under control if you don't allow them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know to what extent hunting is allowed. It is allowed, but I guess it's not necessarily allowed either all the time or free and clear. And like you say, there's just too many of them. Because, I've asked, Daniele, I talk to him all the time. We would drive the vineyards in his Jeep, and I said, well, why don't you just shoot the guns in the air or something? And he's like, I have. He goes, I'll come out. He goes, I've come out here with my Jeep, with the lights on the roof at midnight, 1 a.m. I drive through the vineyard shooting the gun in the air, and I see the deers out in the middle of the vineyard, and they just look at me and they're like, thank you for the delicious grapes. They don't flinch. They don't move. They're used to the noise. They know no one's going to bother them, and they're not stupid. So.
And the food's really good, so they're not going to leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're smart enough to know when the grapes are ripe. They won't bother them until they're ripe. So, you try to plant enough for everybody, because, I mean, it sounds like, he would never be able to make wine, but the fact of the matter is he does. But it just, back to the original point, these guys are farmers. They're beholden to the weather. They're beholden to the temperature, the humidity, the wind, the rain, and then the animals. Yeah. So it's amazing, what they do.
And I do love that about wine, in the sense that every year when you find a producer you like and they make good wine, every year is still going to be different just because of that, because of the wind, the rain, the cold, whatever they're dealing with that particular year is going to be a little bit different in the bottle, which I enjoy exploring those things from year to year.
Right, and that's what makes wine fun, and that's one of the things that has always appealed to me about wine. You go and you buy, whatever, bottle of Budweiser, bottle of whatever. That's what it's going to be the same thing from year to year. Coca-Cola, coffee, basically same thing. But if I gave you, like you just said, if I take a Brunello di Montalcino from one producer and I line up 3 or 4 different vintages, and one is, even if I line them up, the 12, the 13, the 14, and the 15 all in a row, and you taste it, I think the most normal person would be able to at least not tell them apart blind, but they would be able to pick out the differences or notice the differences. And, people always say to me, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I'm like, well, let me ask you this. I said, if I put down in front of you a steak-um, a hamburger, a ribeye, and a filet mignon, could you taste them and tell me that they were different? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, well, I can do the same thing with wine. And if I make it, wine from 1990, 1995, 2000, and then 2015, I guarantee you could tell me the difference. You could notice the difference. So
yeah. And then producer, it could be a Wendy's, a McDonald's, and a Jack in the Box, and you're going to be able to tell the difference. Who's making it?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, there's so many different things that come into play, which is, again, why it's good to have, a resource like mine that you can trust or weed things out. Because when you get a producer who's at a 600 or 700 meter altitude, whose vines are planted in limestone and galestro, versus a producer who's at 200 or 300 meters of altitude, whose vines are planted in clay. There's going to be a very different, a significant difference in the style of that wine. And not only is, the producer that's at the lower altitude and planted in clay might harvest his grapes toward the end of September, and the other one might not harvest until the end of October. So if the producer at the lower altitude, makes a mistake and lets his grapes stay on the vine too long, you're going to get a much higher alcohol content to the wine, because the grapes are just going to continue to ripen.
Right.
And you're going to get it's going to have a markedly different flavor profile. So the producer has to know their land. They got to know their vines. They've got to taste the grapes and harvest at the right time. And that's all part of the variation.
It's a skill, right? I mean, these people really are good at what they do.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at before. They're very, they're extremely passionate, and that's why they come on with me. That's why they have no issues coming on my Zoom with me, because they will talk all the time. They're proud of what they do. They're proud of what they produce, and they love to talk about it. And it's a sense of pride without, bragging in a sense.
And I want to let the listeners know that you also, you're not just calling these wine producers and talking to them about you go to Italy on a regular basis. You dive in deep and get to know these people, and you visit their properties, you visit the vineyards, you walk the land, you talk to them about what they're doing, their entire process. So when we talk about, getting on your website as a resource to learn and gain knowledge about this part of the wine world, you're into it. You're somebody who definitely has that same passion, I would say. You really love what you do.
Right. A lot of people, maybe they take, one vacation to Italy in a lifetime. They go to Rome, they go to Florence, and maybe if they're lucky and they're into it, they hire a car and drive out to Chianti for a day trip. And they may never go back to Italy again. I've been to Italy half a dozen times over the last few years. I was supposed to go twice this year. And now I'm kind of getting to the point where, along with a friend of mine, we're starting these tours that we're, we were supposed to go this year. We're going to be calling them Rustic Tuscany. So this is not going to be a tour that takes you to Rome and Florence and Venice. This is going to be the Chestnut Festival, where you won't even see a tourist. This is going to be 2 or 3 or 4, intimate guided tours of wineries with tastings and lunches. We'll probably hit Siena, but Montalcino is on the radar, but we're not going to go to, Antinori's production facility, which, is a gigantic place. We're going to go to a producer who's got, a dozen large barrels in his basement, but makes high quality wine. The goal of these trips is not to see a tourist.
Right.
And that's what we're going to aim. We're going to aim to start that up as soon as we can.
Oh, that's our kind of trip, my wife and I. Whether it be wine or whatever it is, the hole in the wall, and I call it mom and pop or whatever you want to call it, where what you talked about earlier, the passion and the love of what they're doing shows in what's in the bottle or what's on the plate when you eat. And those are our kind of places. And so when we're members of wine clubs now at different places, Napa or wherever, it's always that kind of place, because those are what we truly enjoy and appreciate. So I'm really happy to hear you say that, John, because we've looked at going to Italy and looked at these different tours and things, and I'm like, I don't want to go see all that. I really want to go into the countryside, into the little towns, and see the people and see what sounds like. That's what you're putting together.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. And it'll be the details we still have to work out in terms of the pricing and whatnot. But it's the idea is to have it be all inclusive with myself and my friend who is speaks fluent Italian. So the two of us will be leading this tour, all expenses paid. You just have to get over there with your own airfare. But, all meals, all transportation, all taxes, admission, tasting fees to the winery if they charge any, which they probably won't. Everything will be paid for. Everything will be included.
Is this going to be an annual thing so people can, get used to it, or is it just going to be periodically, or how are you? Have you thought about it?
Well, I think, ideally, if we could make it work, it would probably be twice a year.
Okay.
But I think we would at least do one a year for sure.
And I'm guessing the same time each year, starting in 2021. Is that the goal?
The goal, yeah, if we can make it happen, the goal would be 2021. We were supposed to go this fall.
Right.
We were supposed to do like a September-October trip this year. So, I think probably what we would probably do is a spring and then a September-October trip.
Okay.
Because June, July, August, it's hot, it's crowded. Even in the small hill towns of Tuscany, it's crowded. So if we can get over there, mid to late May, early June, before schools close, and then again in September, October, maybe before it gets crazy with harvest. But when the weather is cool and the tourists are gone, it's just a great time to be there. And again, we'll have all the transportation lined up, so it's just one fee that you would pay, and you're good to go. You just, follow us.
Well, I can't wait to see when you announce that, so we can definitely get involved and participate with that. That's going to be a great trip. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely do, one or two, and we'll see how it works out.
So I definitely want people to get to your website. Let's tell them the website address, but let's also tell them where they can find you on, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the social media. Give them how they can find you. Sure.
So the website is my name. It's just www.johnfodera, Fodera.com, johnfodera.com. But if you go into Google and you type Tuscan Vines website, I will be the first hit on the top. So either way, you could search for my name, John Fodera, or Tuscan Vines, and that will come up. So as far as social media, I'm active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So it's Twitter, it's at John M. Fodera, Facebook.com/Tuscan Vines, and Instagram.com/Tuscan Vines. But, the SEO is pretty powerful. So anything is, if you go onto Facebook, you type in Tuscan Vines, the page will come up. Same thing for any other platform.
And I love your website. You do great articles that you do on a regular basis, but it's not just wine article. I'll let you tell people what they can get on your website related to Italian wines and things. Yeah.
It's several different things. I have three main pages on the website. One is wine reviews, one is recipes, and one is winemaker interviews. The winemaker interviews kind of are a little bit older because it kind of predates Zoom and all that stuff. I used to conduct them either over the phone or via email mostly. So, the majority of the content is obviously wine related. It's either going to be wine reviews. It might just be a review of a new release that I get a sample of before the wine is even in the market. I'll review it and write an article about it. But what Tuscan Vines, what I always wanted it to be was, I never wanted it to be, I got 3 wines that I put in paper bags and tasted them, at a table with no food, and write a 2 or 3 sentence review, and that's it. When I conceived of Tuscan Vines, the whole idea was, give me more. I wanted more, so I wanted to give my readers more. And what I mean by that is, like we discussed, Italian wine is made to be with family and friends and food at the table. It isn't meant to be a cocktail wine typically sitting by the fire pit at night. So I always taste the wine, initially when I open it, without the food. I'll just have a few sips, I'll smell it. But then that wine goes on the table where we eat, and I pay attention to how it interacts with the food. And if it tastes different or if it's been mellowed out by a sauce or a grilled steak. And that's how I kind of build my reviews. So I do give a number score only as a, point of reference, but I would, encourage people when they read my reviews to look at the characteristics that I'm picking out in the wine and definitely try to get a sense of the style of the wine to see if it, might line up with your palate. And then I always try to provide some history, a little bit at least, of the winery and what's going on there. So every review is a couple paragraphs. It's not just one or two sentences. So then from time to time, I'll do a deeper dive, on a major article. If a winery sends me samples and they send me 4 or 5 wines, it's kind of hard to write 4 or 5 articles and mention different things about the winery, right? I mean, I can cut and paste, and no one's going to be interested in that.
Right.
So I'll aggregate the wines, I'll taste them, and I'll save them until I've gotten through all of them. Then I'll write what I call like a feature article on that winery. The last one I did on that, I think, was Donna Fugata from Sicily. They had sent me a bunch of different wines, 3 or 4 wines. So I saved them all and I aggregated them into one, larger article. And then, I have my Brunello coverage, which is a much, anticipated, I think, annual article. And it's actually a series of articles because I've gotten in, so many samples. And I think, people appreciate, smaller bites of knowledge. It's a little bit easier to digest, right? So I put them out 10 reviews at a clip in each part. And again, there's always some history in there, of the winery. There's plenty of photos, little anecdotes that might be funny will be in there, along with the reviews of the wine. So part 1 for the 2015 Brunellos, which is the current vintage, obviously, that just came out earlier this month, and it'll probably be at least another 5 or 6 parts because I've got a ton of 2015 Brunellos to get through. So that's something to look forward to. And then, the recipes are always popular because, like I said, the wine goes on a table and you've got to have good food on the table. So, at an early age, I just picked up cooking from my mother, my father, my grandmother, and, I like to cook. It's fun and relaxing for me. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. I love your recipes part of the website as well because, you've got it kind of segmented out for if you're looking for something from meats or seafood or side dishes or a pasta, risotto. You have it all broken out, and you make some fantastic dishes. Are these your recipes that you just come up with?
Some of them are. Some of them, if I kind of tweak things with my own style and it comes out good and it looks good in a picture, yeah, definitely. But, otherwise I've just, made the classics,
Yeah.
A pesto, carbonara, puttanesca, whatever it may be. They're just classic dishes that people look for.
I'll do that a lot of times. I'll make the classic, and then I'll go, okay, what would I do to kind of put a little twist on it? And then next time I make it, try to just, have a little fun with it.
Right, exactly. And I tend to make, more traditional recipes if I'm having it with the wine. I don't typically, like if you're trying to think of you go to not even a chain restaurant or anything like that, but you go to a family-owned place and they might have, penne pasta with, grilled chicken and roasted tomatoes and artichokes thrown in, right? I don't think you would never, ever find meat like that in a pasta in Italy unless it's like a long cooked ragu of meat. They don't just throw in, chunks of salmon and chunks of chicken into a pasta.
Right.
They would always eat it separately. So that's something I typically don't do.
Okay. You're very traditional.
Yeah, it's just things that either maybe we were out at a restaurant or maybe we're in Italy and we have something and I'm like, man, I have to copy that.
Yeah.
I got to see if I can reverse engineer it, when we get home. And if I do, I definitely put it on the website. One of the best dishes I have, that people rave about, and I kind of have to update the article because the pictures I'm not that happy with because I did it so many years ago. Is my I think it's called Tuscan shrimp and beans. And I had that at a dish, at a place near the Tuscan coast. And then I was at a local restaurant here, and they had it. So I'm like, I got it. I'm like, wow, this is unbelievable. And all it really is, a little onion, a little, shrimp, some white cannellini bean, but the way it just comes together, it's just perfection, and it's easy to do. And every time I make it, either like as an appetizer or as a first course, everybody always asks me for the recipe. So it's funny because I just had it. My wife had some friends over last week, for cocktails and appetizers, and she's like, can you make me that? So I made it, and I brought it out, and her friends, and they all were raving about it. But the one woman's husband is an owner of a local restaurant where we go to a lot, and she's like, I wouldn't be surprised if this shows up on the restaurant menu. I was like, well, she wanted the recipe, and I'm like, it's right there on my website.
There you go.
So
is that the Tuscan beans and gambari? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm looking at it now. Yeah, that looks interesting. I've never heard of, I wouldn't have thought beans and shrimp would work.
It's really good.
I'm going to probably make that today.
It's you don't find shrimp, a lot in Tuscany unless you're going down toward the coast. You won't find it as much, but it's just a wonderful dish. It's easy to do, and
yeah, it looks great.
Like I say in there, I've used fresh shrimp and cleaned them myself, and if you can find a high quality frozen shrimp, I think I do that almost all the time because I don't really notice a tremendous difference. Because around here you're not getting. You'd have to go to certain places to find fresh wild shrimp. That would probably make a difference. The fresh shrimp you get here are farm raised, so I don't see any difference between that and a high quality frozen shrimp.
I agree with you. Absolutely agree. Yeah. So, John, I appreciate you coming on today and visiting with us and letting us kind of explore your knowledge of Tuscany, Tuscan wines, Sangiovese, just that whole part of the wine world. I'm hoping I can get you to come back on. We can continue to have more conversations about Italian wines and let the listeners just kind of continue to get this education in Italy and the fantastic wines that they're producing over there. Because I know you love Tuscany, but you also love, I think, all Italian wines, right? Whether it's Barolo or Barbaresco going up north.
Yeah. So. Happy to come back. It was a lot of fun. And, the only other thing that I would mention, too, is if you go to my website and you'll get a pop-up that asks if you want to join the newsletter. So that might be something that your listeners would want to do. And, again, the newsletter is completely free. But what I do in there is basically one of two things. I give my readers either advanced content. So if there's a great wine that is not yet released, but I've got a sample, I'll give them a review maybe 2 to 3 weeks before I put it on the website so they can look for it. Or I just give them exclusive content, that doesn't ever hit the website. And one of those things was a coupon code not too long ago with a partnership I have with an Enoteca in Montalcino, which has a ton of great wines. They ship worldwide, and my coupon code, which never expires, gives you 10% off, and that typically will more than pay for the shipping. And some of the prices, when you convert them from euro to dollars, you're saving a ton of money. So,
yeah, absolutely.
It's an easy way to get some great wines. And I mean, the wine shop is, half a mile from most wineries. So these bottles are in perfect condition.
That's a great point. That's great that you mentioned that. I think that's a great point.
Yep. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to the next conversation, John. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it very much. Looking forward to the next one. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.
All right. Thank you, Rob.